Joe Robinette Biden Jr. was born in 1942 in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the oldest of four. Known as a poor student but a natural leader, Biden played football and baseball in high school and served as class president his junior and senior years. Biden attended the University of Delaware in Newark, where he double majored in history and political science. He battled a stutter, which improved in his early 20s, and has said he recited poetry in a mirror to overcome it. While he's blamed the stutter for less than ideal debate performances at times, he's also tapped into the disability to encourage others, especially young people, working to overcome obstacles and gain confidence.
Without Joe Biden, I wouldn't be talking to you today.
In 1966, Biden married Nelia Hunter, despite her parents' reticence in allowing her to marry a Roman Catholic. The couple had 3 children, Bo, Robert, and Naomi. In 1968, Biden graduated from Syracuse University College of Law and then clerked at a Wilmington law firm headed by a prominent local Republican, and has said he considered himself a Republican as well, but registered as an independent because of his dislike for Republican nominee Richard Nixon. Biden became a public defender and then practiced at a firm run by a Democrat, then registering as a Democrat himself. In 1969, Biden was elected to a county council seat in a traditionally Republican district of Delaware, running on a platform of opposing large highway projects and support for public housing in the suburbs, a topic that President Trump has used at campaign rallies. In 1972, Biden became the junior U.S. Senator for Delaware and one of the youngest senators in the country, despite being given virtually no odds of winning and having very little money in his campaign. Instead, he relied on meeting voters face-to-face on a platform of withdrawal from the Vietnam War, civil rights, the environment, mass transit, equitable taxation, and health care. Then tragedy for his young family. His wife and 1-year-old daughter killed in a car crash. Bo suffered a broken leg and Hunter a skull fracture. Biden was compelled to quit to care for his 2 young sons, but was persuaded by the Senate Majority Leader to remain in the Senate.
Your loved one may have left this earth, but they'll never leave your heart. They'll always be with you. You'll always hear them. And second, I found the best way through pain and loss and grief is to find purpose.
Instead, he commuted by train 3 hours a day between Delaware and Washington for 36 years. In 1977, Biden married Jill Jacobs and credits her with renewing his interest in politics. They had a daughter, Ashley, now a social worker, in 1981. In his early years in the Senate, Biden focused on consumer protection, the environment, housing, job opportunities, voting rights, but still considered himself a conservative on issues like abortion and military conscription. And some of his votes would come back to haunt him, in one case by his own future running mate.
Do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America?
In the 1970s, he opposed race integration busing. In 1984, Biden was instrumental in passing the Comprehensive Crime Control Act, now considered by critics to be one of the key contributors to mass incarceration in the United States, disproportionately impacting people of color, which he now says was a mistake. In 1993, Biden voted to ban gays from the military, and in 1996, he voted against same-sex marriages. He also voted in favor of the Iraq War.
This is a bad guy. This is the guy who violated the terms of a peace agreement. This is the guy who continues to do it. This guy has a record of demonstrating he will use those weapons.
Biden made arms control a priority and gained attention during a hearing on the Reagan administration's support of apartheid South Africa.
I hate to hear an administration and a Secretary of State refusing to act on a morally abhorrent point. I hate to hear this country, I'm ashamed that this country puts out a policy like this that says nothing, nothing. It says continue the same. We put no timetable on. We make no specific demand. We don't set it down. I'm ashamed that's our policy. That's what I'm ashamed of. I'm ashamed of the lack of moral backbone to this policy.
As chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Biden oversaw 6 Supreme Court confirmation hearings, including that of Robert Bork in 1988 and Clarence Thomas in 1991, when Anita Hill testified.
On several occasions, Thomas told me graphically of his own sexual prowess.
Biden did not allow testimony from other witnesses, such as a woman who had made similar charges against Thomas and experts on harassment. Biden opposed Thomas's nomination, but in the end, he was confirmed. In recent years, Biden has said he regrets his treatment of Hill and has since sought out women to serve on the Judiciary Committee, calling the Violence Against Women Act his most significant legislative accomplishment. Biden also helped craft the federal assault weapons ban and helped create the U.S. drug czar. As a longtime member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, including serving as ranking member and chairman of the NATO Observer Group, and chairman of the Subcommittee on European Affairs, he often collaborated with Republicans and went against his own party. In the 2000s, he sponsored bankruptcy legislation sought by credit card issuers opposed by consumer rights organizations. In 1991, Biden voted against the Gulf War. Biden met with Serbian leader Slobodan Milosevic and helped lead a successful NATO peacekeeping efforts in the mid-90s, which he touts as his proudest foreign policy achievement.
And I might add, the leader of Serbia, Milosevic, is also a war criminal, although he's the only one not indicted so far.
Biden's run for the presidency actually began more than 3 decades ago when he officially announced his candidacy in 1987. He was considered a strong candidate, but was dogged by accusations of plagiarism and exaggerated claims about his credentials, and he withdrew from the race. He again ran for the 2008 election, focusing on the Iraq War and his foreign policy experience, but some gaffes on the campaign trail hurt his ability to raise money, and he failed to gain traction against Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and again withdrew. Candidate Obama sought out Biden for his foreign policy experience and connection to blue-collar voters, and Biden eventually joined the ticket, simultaneously running for re-election of his Senate seat in Delaware and the vice presidency, and winning both races. Before resigning from the Senate, he cast his last vote for the Troubled Asset Relief Program and visited Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. When Obama became the first African-American president of the United States, Biden became the first Roman Catholic vice president and led the transition team. As vice president, Biden opposed sending additional troops into Afghanistan, but lost to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. He became the point person on Iraq, visiting the war-torn nation every couple of months, and was also in charge of overseeing infrastructure spending from the Obama stimulus package during the recession. He was known within the administration to be a contrarian who challenged groupthink. The Obama administration also capitalized on Biden's relationships with congressional Republicans, fueling the compromise tax package and negotiations to avoid government shutdowns. In the foreign policy realm, Biden supported military intervention in Libya and closer economic relations with Russia, and favored arming Syria's rebels and dividing Iraq into 3 states along ethnic lines. Obama named Biden to head the gun violence task force after the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Then in 2015, another personal setback. His son, Beau, who served as an Army judge advocate in Iraq and later Delaware Attorney General, died of brain cancer, and Biden decided not to run for the presidency. But when the following election season rolled around, Biden cited his distaste for the Trump presidency, the lack of foreign policy experience among other Democrats, and his desire to build bridges, and threw his hat into the ring.
The core values of this nation, our standing in the world, our very democracy, everything that has made America, America is at stake. That's why today I'm announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
And so now in a few months, he will be able to add president to the end of that resume, capping that long career and that life in politics. And notably tonight, he did evoke his son, Beau. He has consistently brought up Beau throughout this run and throughout the campaign. And tonight, Beau was very much in his heart. So when he is sworn in, Joe Biden will be the oldest president also in American history.